My daughter didn't look at me when she said it. She was staring at her phone. One leg crossed over the crossed, her heel tapping against the leg of the chair in that impatient way she'd had since she was 16 years old. My son-in-law sat beside her, arms folded, jaw tight. The attorney's office was quiet, except for the sound of a clock on the wall and the faint hum of an air conditioner that wasn't doing enough against the July heat. "Mom," Claire said, still not looking up. "Just sign where Mr. Harmon marked the tabs. It's not complicated." I looked at the papers in front of me. 16 pages. A thick stack of yellow sticky tabs along the right edge, each one with a little arrow pointing to a line at the bottom. My name was already typed above each line. All I had to do, apparently, was confirm that I agreed. I folded my hands in my lap and said nothing. My husband Gerald had been gone for 14 months. 14 months since I sat in a different chair, in a different office, and listened to a different attorney explain what happened to a life when one half of it stopped breathing. Gerald and I had been married for 41 years. We built everything together. The house on Sycamore Drive, the rental property on the east side of town, the savings account that neither of us ever touched unless we absolutely had to. We were careful people. We believed in being careful. I was 68 years old, and I had been careful my entire life. "Mom." Claire's voice had an edge now. She set the phone face down on the armrest. "We've been over this. It's just a property management transfer. Kevin and I are better positioned to handle the finances right now. You said yourself you don't want to deal with tenants and maintenance calls." That was true. I had said that. What I hadn't said was that I was willing to hand over the deed to a house that Gerald's father had built with his own hands in 1962. Kevin cleared his throat. He was a trim man in an expensive shirt, the kind that has no wrinkles because it costs too much to wrinkle. He had a quality that I can only describe as practiced patience. The look of a man who has learned to appear calm because losing his composure has cost him things before. "Dorothy," he said. He always called me Dorothy. Gerald had called me Dottie. My friends called me Dot. Kevin called me Dorothy from the day Claire brought him home, and it always felt like being addressed by someone reading my name off a form. "We want to make sure the estate is protected. You've got 2 properties, the accounts, the investments Gerald left behind. That's a lot to manage alone." "I'm not alone," I said. "I have my attorney." "Henderson?" Kevin almost smiled. "He's a good man for writing up a will. This is more complex than that." Across the table, Mr. Harmon, their attorney, not mine, pressed his fingertips together and said nothing. He was being paid to be present. He was doing his job. I looked at the papers again. The house on Sycamore was worth somewhere around $400,000 now. The rental property, close to $300,000. The accounts Gerald had left me, plus the life insurance, plus the pension, all of it together came to something neither of us had ever said out loud, because Gerald believed that saying a number out loud made you careless with it. Claire leaned forward. She put her hand over mine on the table. Her nails were painted the color of red wine, and her rings were new. She'd gotten new rings recently. I'd noticed. "Mom," she said, and her voice softened into something that was almost the voice she'd had as a little girl. Almost. "We just want to take care of you. That's all this is. You don't need to worry about any of this anymore. Kevin and I will handle everything. You can just rest, travel, do the things you and Dad always talked about doing, the things Gerald and I always talked about doing." I thought about Gerald then, not the Gerald from the last 2 years, when he was tired and slow and had to hold the railing on the stairs. I thought about the Gerald from before, the one who used to sit at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings with the newspaper and his coffee, who would look up when I walked in and smile like I'd done something remarkable just by entering the room. That Gerald, the one who built everything we had by working 30 years in a job he didn't love because he loved us more. I thought about what that Gerald would say if he could see this table. These papers. these yellow tabs with their little arrows. I didn't sign. I told them I needed more time to review the documents. Kevin's jaw tightened. Claire pressed her lips together. Mr. Harmon gathered his papers with the neutral efficiency of a man who had seen this before and would see it again. We shook hands at the door, and my daughter hugged me in the parking lot with her arms and not her heart. And I drove home alone on streets I'd driven for 40 years. That night, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. The house was quiet the way a house is quiet when someone who used to be in it isn't anymore. I could hear the refrigerator and the oak tree outside and my own breathing. I thought about the phone call I wasn't supposed to have heard. It was 3 weeks before that office meeting. I had driven over to Claire and Kevin's house to drop off a pie. Ridiculous, I know. But I had needed something to do with my hands that afternoon, and baking was the thing my hands remembered. I'd let myself in with the key they'd given me years ago. I wasn't trying to be quiet. I simply was quiet, the way older women in comfortable shoes tend to be in houses they've visited 100 times. I heard Kevin's voice from the study. The door wasn't fully closed. She's not going to live forever, Claire. The longer we wait, the more complicated this gets. Henderson might talk her into something we can't undo. A pause. My daughter's voice, lower. She trusts me. Then use that. We don't need all of it. Just the properties in the transfer. Once those are under the LLC, the accounts are the easy part. She won't even. I set the pie on the kitchen counter without a sound. I walked back out the way I came. I drove to a coffee shop 3 miles away and sat in a corner booth for an hour and a half. I didn't order anything. The young woman behind the counter eventually brought me a glass of water without being asked, and I was grateful for that small kindness more than I could have explained. I thought about what I knew and what I didn't know, and what I needed to find out. I had built my whole adult life on the belief that my daughter would not do this to me. That belief had to be set aside now. Carefully, the way you set aside something fragile that you still aren't sure is broken. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe Kevin had been speaking theoretically, or about someone else. Or maybe the words had a meaning I hadn't caught. I gave myself 2 days to consider those possibilities honestly. At the end of 2 days, I called my nephew Robert. Robert was 44, a quiet man who worked in finance and visited me every Thanksgiving and remembered, without being reminded, that I took my tea without sugar. Robert was the kind of person I had always trusted without examination, the way you trust good weather or a solid floor. I asked him if he could recommend an estate attorney. Not Henderson. Someone Robert knew personally. He didn't ask why. He gave me a name and a number and said, "Aunt Dorothy, whatever you need." Her name was Patricia Osei. She had an office downtown, on the 14th floor of a building with a view of the river, and she wore reading glasses on a chain and spoke in the precise and unhurried way of someone who has learned that clarity is a form of respect. She was, I would later find out, one of the better estate attorneys in the state. Robert had not sent me to anyone less. I told her everything. The phone call, the meeting being proposed, the LLC, Kevin had mentioned. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she removed her glasses and held them in one hand and said, "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm glad you came to me before you signed anything. We met 4 times over the following weeks." Carefully, I told Claire I was having lunch with my friend Evelyn, which was sometimes true and sometimes not, and I felt the weight of that small deception and accepted it as the cost of what was happening. Patricia explained the documents I eventually received, the ones Kevin and Mr. Harmon had prepared with the kind of thorough patience that told me she had reviewed them very carefully and found exactly what she expected to find. The property transfer would have moved both houses into an LLC controlled by Kevin. The language around the accounts was not, she explained, standard language for an estate management agreement. There were clauses I would not have understood without her, clauses Gerald would never have agreed to if anyone had explained them to him. "What do you want to do?" Patricia asked me. The third time we met, I had been thinking about that question for weeks. What I wanted was for none of this to be true. What I wanted was for my daughter to be the person I had raised her to believe she could be. What I wanted was Gerald, sitting across from me at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning, smiling like I'd done something remarkable. What I had was what was in front of me. I want to protect what Gerald built, I said. All of it. So that nobody can touch it without my knowing and my choosing. We can do that, Patricia said. We did. By the time Claire scheduled the meeting at Mr. Harmon's office, the work was already done. A new trust. All assets restructured. Both properties, the accounts, everything Gerald had left me properly protected, properly documented. With Patricia as my attorney of record and Robert as my trustee, if anything should ever happen to me. I had also, quietly and without drama, updated my will. I had not told Claire. I had not told Kevin. I sat in that office with their yellow-tabbed papers and their impatient silences, and I thought about everything that had already been put in place, and I said I needed more time, and I drove home, and I sat in the kitchen, and I let myself feel all of it for one long night. In the morning, I called Patricia and told her I was ready. She sent the letter the following week. It went to Mr. Harmon's office, with a copy to Claire and Kevin's home address. I had not told them it was coming. I had learned, apparently, to keep certain things to myself. I don't know exactly what happened in their house when the letter arrived. I know what happened in mine. I was in the garden when Claire called. I'd been out there since 7 in the morning, pulling weeds from around the rose bushes Gerald had planted the year we moved in. I had dirt on my gloves, and the sun was warm on my back, and the roses were doing better than they had in years. I had been neglecting them since Gerald got sick, and I was making it right. My phone rang, Claire's name on the screen. I took off one glove and answered, "Mom." Her voice was different, tighter, stripped of the softness she'd used in Mr. Harmon's office. "What is this?" It was not a question. It was the sound of someone who had opened a door expecting one room and found another. "It's a letter from my attorney," I said, "explaining the structure of my estate and confirming that I'll be managing it myself going forward." Silence. "You hired someone else." Still, not a question. "I hired someone to help me understand what I was being asked to sign," I said. "That seems like the kind of thing a person should do." "Mom," her voice cracked slightly on the word, "we were trying to help you. You know that, right? You can't manage all of this alone. She stopped. I waited. I knew what word she'd been reaching for. A word about my age, or my state of mind, or my ability. She'd pulled it back. Maybe that meant something. I hoped it did. "I'm what?" I said, not unkindly. She didn't answer. "I'm 68 years old," I said. "I taught school for 27 years. I raised you. I managed our household finances while your father worked 60 hours a week. I am not incapable, Claire. I am your mother." Another silence. Longer, Kevin thought. "I know what Kevin thought," I said. I heard him. The silence that followed was a different kind. The kind that happens when something that was never supposed to be said out loud finally is. I pulled another weed from around the base of the nearest rosebush. The roots came out clean, all in one piece. That's satisfying. "I'm not doing this to punish you," I told her. "I want you to understand that. I'm not angry. I'm not building a case against you. You're my daughter. That doesn't change." I paused. "But I'm not signing those papers. I'm not signing anything that Kevin has prepared. What your father and I built belongs to me now, and I will decide what becomes of it. That's all." Claire was crying by then. I could hear it. The sound of my daughter crying was a sound I had responded to her entire life, with every part of myself, and it was no easier to hear now. I let myself feel it. I did not let it move me from where I was standing. "I love you," I said. "Come have dinner with me on Sunday. Without Kevin, if you need time to think, the door is open." I hung up and I put my glove back on, and I kept working. I found out later, through Robert, that Kevin had called Patricia's office that same afternoon. She had been pleasant and precise and entirely unmovable. He'd apparently asked to speak with me directly, which Patricia had declined to arrange. He called Robert as well, which Robert mentioned to me on the phone that evening, with a dry calm that reminded me of why I had always loved that boy. He wanted to explain his side, Robert said. I'm sure he did, I said. I told him you were well represented and that I had complete confidence in your judgment. Thank you, Robert. Aunt Dorothy. A pause. Uncle Gerald would have loved this. I thought about that for a moment. I thought about the Gerald who spent 30 years being careful so that nothing could be taken from us. The one who used to say, when I worried about things, that worry was just fear that hadn't decided what it was afraid of yet. The one who taught me, without meaning to, that quiet and patient and prepared were more powerful than loud. He would have handled it better, I said. I don't think so, said Robert. The Sunday dinner happened. Claire came alone. She sat at the same table where she had eaten 10,000 meals, where she had done homework and told me things she hadn't told anyone else, and cried over boys and laughed until the table shook. She looked tired. She looked, in a way I didn't quite know how to hold, like someone who had been given a version of herself she didn't recognize and was trying to figure out who to blame. We ate. We talked carefully around the edges of what had happened, and then, halfway through the meal, Claire set down her fork and said, I didn't understand how far Kevin had gone with it. I want you to know that. I looked at her. That's not an excuse, she said. I know that. I want you to know. I thought about all the ways I could respond to that, about all the things that were true that I could say. I thought about the evening I had spent going through those 16 pages with Patricia, the two of us at a conference table with cups of coffee going cold, and Patricia explaining each clause in plain language. I thought about what it had felt like to see the shape of what was being asked of me. I thought about how much I wanted my daughter back. I know, I said. I believe you. She cried again, briefly. I passed her the breadbasket. After a while, we started talking about other things. About her garden, which was struggling, and mine, which was doing better. About a trip I was thinking of taking to see the coast of Maine, which Gerald and I had talked about for years and never managed. About small things, real things. The shape of what we were going to become to each other was not yet clear. There was still a lot that would need to be worked out, slowly, with care. I was not naive about that. I had spent 14 months learning that grief and disappointment do not follow the timelines you set for them. But we were at the table. That was something. A few weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, I met Patricia at her office to review the final documents. Everything was in order. The trust was properly structured. The properties were protected. The accounts were as Gerald had left them, minus nothing, minus not one thing that we had spent our life building together. Patricia walked me through each page. I asked questions, the way I had learned to ask questions. She answered them the way she always did, carefully and completely. When we were done, she slid the folder across the table to me and said, "You should be proud of how you handled this." I looked at the folder, my name on the tab, Gerald's name in the document headers, 41 years of careful work, accounted for, protected, intact. "I'm relieved," I said. "Proud might take a while longer." She smiled at that. I liked her smile. I took the folder home and put it in the filing cabinet in Gerald's study, the cabinet where he kept the important things, insurance documents and deed copies, and the folder labeled simply House that had every receipt and repair record going back to 1987. I put my folder beside his. Then I went out to the garden. The roses were blooming. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily. The way roses do when you pay attention to them after a long time of not being able to. I stood there for a while with my hands in my pockets and the sun on my face and the smell of the yard in summer all around me. The same yard I had walked into as a young woman when we first moved here and thought, I could make something beautiful here. Gerald had believed in taking care of things before they needed it. He used to say that most people wait until something breaks to think about how to protect it. He said it about the house, about money, about old friendships. I had always thought he was talking about being practical. I understood now that he was talking about something larger than that. I was 68 years old and I owned 2 properties and a trust and a filing cabinet full of documents in order and a daughter I was in the slow work of finding my way back to. I had a nephew who answered the phone on the first ring and an attorney who wore her glasses on a chain and spoke to me like I was capable of understanding anything if it was explained well enough. I had a garden that was coming back. I was not owed any of this. I knew that. You are not owed the things you have built, only the chance to protect them. And you are not always given that chance either. I had been given it. I had used it. The oak tree moved in a little wind, and the light shifted, and I thought about Maine. The coast Gerald had always wanted to see. The lobster, the cold water, the towns with the painted signs and the boats in the harbor. He had a way of describing places he'd never been that made you feel you'd already been there with him. I thought I might go in September. I thought I might like that. There was nothing more to decide today. Everything that needed to be done had been done. Carefully, in order, without anyone's permission but my own. The papers were signed. The right papers, the ones I had chosen. I went inside to make a cup of tea.